Peace TV English, the solution for humanity.
He created the universe. To him belong the heavens and the earth. The ever-living, he is the first. He's the owner of mercy. He sent his messengers to warn his creatures of the grave danger.
This is Rishi Majumdar from Tehelka magazine in an interview with Dr. Zakir Naik. Hello, sir. Dr. Naik, through childhood and adolescence, what was it that shaped or defined your understanding of Islam? And if there are any particular incidents which you'd quote, which were sort of turning points in your understanding of Islam?
Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain. Amma ba'd. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. As far as my understanding is concerned, alhamdulillah, I had parents who were practicing Muslims, mashallah. So since childhood, mashallah, I'm a practicing Muslim. But the turning point in my life was that I was just average Muslim, offering salah, fasting, just like any other Muslim. But the thing that turned my life around was when I met Sheikh Ahmed Deedat. Sheikh Ahmed Deedat happens to be from South Africa, and he's called as the Muslim scholar of the Christian Bible. And when he came in Bombay in December 1987, when I was doing my second year MBBS in Nayar Hospital, TN Medical College, when I met him, that was the turning point of my life. After meeting him, I felt that besides being a good Muslim, it's the duty of a Muslim that they should spread the message of peace throughout the world.
Could you elucidate a bit on this meeting, on what this meeting was like? Did you hear him when he was speaking, or did you meet him straight away? Could you just describe it in a bit of detail?
I had seen him before because he had many video cassettes. So initially I had seen him on video cassettes, but when he came to Bombay, it was the first time I met him face to face. And after meeting him face to face, that is the time I was inspired more. Right. And after he left, I used to see his video cassettes. So that was the turning point in my life that changed me from doctor of a body to doctor of a soul.
As a person, when you saw him in the flesh for the first time, personality like that, what was it about his personality which drew you the most, which affected you the most, or influenced you the most? And in what way? Because you had seen him before, so you had heard his preachings, you knew what he had to say. But when you met him, what was it that struck?
Whenever you heard his videotapes, you realize that he's a person who used to present Islam in a logical way. And at that time, in the 80s,
right,
we found that Islam was being maligned, and also being maligned. And the way he replied to the allegations against the people who wrote books against Islam, or especially the Christian missionaries, who used to quote the Bible, quote the Quran, try to quote out of context, and try to prove the superiority of Christianity. So this is a man who comes and replies, so it makes the Muslims feel proud that we're Muslims. And after meeting him, seeing the person, how humble he was, and having a personal interaction, that inspired me more to see more of his cassettes. Right. Previously, I had seen a few of his tapes. Right. When he left, he had given me many tapes, mashallah, over 100 tapes. And that's how hearing more of his tapes I got inspired, and that's how I started preaching the message of truth.
Right. When you did decide to take that path, you had studied to be a doctor, you were working as a doctor, your father is also a doctor. So when you took that path, was there any hesitation on the part of your family because you were not going into a conventional profession, so to speak?
Yes, my father is a doctor, he's a psychiatrist by profession, and my elder brother also is a medical doctor. Right. Initially, when I met Sheikh Ahmed Deedat in 1987, as I told you, I was doing my second year MBBS. Right. And later on, when I got inspired by him, by the time I finished my MBBS, my final year, then I told my parents that I want to give 2 hours every day for spreading the message of peace. And the balance, I will do my medical practice. My parents did not object to us, there's no problem. Later on, I said that I want 50% time for spreading the message of peace and 50% time for doing my medical practice. Then my parents said, no problem. Yeah. Then I said, I'll give 2 hours for medical practice and balance for spreading the message of peace. They said, no problem. Then later on I said, I want to give 100% time for spreading the message of peace, and that also didn't object at all. So now actually I'm just a silent partner in the medical business that we have. We have a diagnostic center, we have a clinic, general practice, etc. So at present I'm just a silent partner. I'm a 50% partner. My bread and butter comes from there. But I've dedicated myself fully, honorary, voluntary, for the sake of spreading the message of peace.
However, this dedication, like you say, was gradual on your part because
Of
it
course,
happened slowly.
Of course. Actually, initially, my mother, she wanted me to be a heart specialist, someone like Chris Barnard. And if you're aware that Dr. Chris Barnard also happens to come from South Africa, from the same country where Sheikh Ahmed Didat comes from. And he was the first surgeon who did the first heart transplant. So it was the desire of my mother that I should be somewhat like Dr. Chris Barnard. So when I asked her, after I got involved in the field of spreading the message of peace, when I asked her that, would you want me to become like Sheikh Ahmed Didat or Dr. Chris Barnard? So she said, both.
Right.
Later on, after a few years, when I got more involved in the field of spreading the message of truth and spreading the message of peace, later on, after many years, when I asked her that, would you prefer me to become like Sheikh Ahmed Didat or Dr. Chris Barnard? She said, I can sacrifice 1,000 Dr. Chris Barnard for one Sheikh Ahmed Didat.
Right. This was later when once you were well on your way. What would you say were some of the most important things which you learned from your father and your mother, from your parents, as you grew up? Is there something which you were influenced by them in any way that stayed with you? Any essential thing that you learned from your parents which you would like to talk?
Yes, most of my basic, could say that the knowledge and my nature of humanity was basically from my parents. That being a truthful person, never speak a lie, always be honest, try and work for humanity, that your main life should be dedicated for the cause of humanity. And that was one of the reasons that I chose to be a medical doctor, because I felt that being a medical doctor was the best profession in humanity, as far as human beings are concerned, and it is a good profession. But later on, when I found a better profession, when I had to treat the patients who were sick, I had to treat them and treat the disease, I had to get immense pleasure. But when I treated the people spiritually, I found multiple times more pleasure. That is the time I changed from a doctor of a body to doctor of a soul.
And before that, you spoke about the fact that your mother wanted you to be a heart specialist. What about you? Did you also want to really, before you changed your path, so to speak, did you really want to be a heart specialist? Or is that your chosen area of specialization?
Yes, I wanted to be a surgeon.
You wanted to be a surgeon?
Be a surgeon, then first there's surgery and then there's super speciality. So my specialization, I wanted to be a surgeon. Then fine, whether heart, whether brain, whichever. But the thing was, I wanted to be a surgeon. And the options were there. But my mother wanted me to be a heart specialist, which I thought, okay, either heart or either brain, one of the two.
Right. Dr. Naik, when we come to, now if we come to the other path which you chose instead, when you were to walk on that path, what were your steps? You know, you said you spoke about 10% of your time, then 25%, then 50%, then 70%, then gradually 100% of your time devoted to this particular path. But when you started out, how did you start out? Was there any planning involved? Did you start? What were your first steps in this direction? How did your journey begin?
There was no planning from my side. It was planning from God's side.
Right.
But naturally, when I started, I never knew that I would be a speaker. Because if those who know my background, that I was a stammerer since birth. Since childhood I used to stammer. And anyone asked me what was the name, my name is Zakir. And in school, during education, you know, I had to get pass, fail, PF. Though I used to fail, but because the teachers knew I used to stammer, they used to give just pass marking. But later on, when I got involved in spreading the message of truth, and when I spoke to anyone, with different people regarding religion, regarding truth, regarding peace, I found that while I used to speak, the stammering vanished. And there was an occasion when I remember the first time when I tried giving speeches or handling question and answer session. It was one of my friends was also good in handling question and answer session, so we had decided that okay, once a week he will speak, once a week I will speak. So first he was supposed to speak, but last minute he said, no, you go ahead. And I went, though he was supposed to speak, and it clicked well. And I realized that I did not stammer when I was speaking in front of the public. It wasn't a very big gathering, small gathering of 25 people. And later on it so happened that whenever anyone else went and they faltered, I used to go and take their place. And that's how it was unplanned. I never thought I would be a public speaker. I could have dreamt of becoming the best doctor in the world. I could have dreamt of becoming the best surgeon in the world, because in a dream, a person can dream anything.
Right.
But I could not have dreamt of speaking in front of 25 people,
Right.
because I was a stammerer since childhood.
Right.
But Allah has His way, God has His way, that it progressed, and now we give lectures in front of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people,
Right.
even in front of a million people live.
Right. Right.
So that's how it started slowly, and I realized that whenever I was to speak regarding Islam, regarding peace, regarding truth, I never stammered.
Right.
And since childhood, I was very good in arguing.
Right.
I was a person who could argue very well.
Right.
So I channelized my ability for spreading the truth.
Right.
Previously, it was just any small issue.
Right.
We used to just have argument generally just to see who's good in debating.
Right.
Okay, can you prove black is white or white is black? And that was the way we used to have discussions.
Right.
Then I realized that I used this good ability that God had given me
Right.
regarding arguing, regarding reasoning, and the ability to memorize.
Right.
Both put together, that helped me a lot in delivering lectures, etc.
And the debates that you're talking about, they used to happen in school or they used to happen at home?
No, in school, just about small issues, just day-to-day life.
Or just for the
Just for the heck of it, not that it was a formalized debate per se.
Right.
Arguing on small issues, whether at school, whether at home, it
Right.
was the same.
Right. And your first public speech, Dr. Naik, was at what age?
Public speech, or rather you could say a speech at a small gathering in an office.
Like the one you're talking about, where about 25 people were there, that one?
Yes, that was a question and answer session, just maybe a couple of months after that.
Right.
I believe it was in 1992,
19.
towards the end of 1992,
Towards the end of
where I gave a speech on Is the Quran God's Word at a small gathering, which had about 50, 60 people.
Right.
My first speech I prepared,
Right.
and I had planned to give for 1 hour.
Right.
But not knowing how much time it takes and how many minutes are required for each page, I ended up giving a talk of 3 hours non-stop without notes. 3 hours.
And this was without stammering. You had a,
Without stammering, without notes. Without stammering is one thing.
yeah, but without notes is
From day one, never have I given any lecture with notes. So I thought I had to give a 1 hour speech, and I prepared many pages, not knowing how much time it takes, and I ended up giving a speech for 3 hours non-stop, followed by question and answer session. That was the first. And the first public speech was in 1993. That's at Indian Merchants Chamber, an audience of about 500 people. And the topic was Quran Modern Science. Then later on it was 1994,
Right.
and the topic was Women's Rights in Islam. That's at YB Chawan in Mumbai, followed by press debate on the topic, Is religious fundamentalism a stumbling block for the freedom of expression?
Right.
A topic dealing with Salman Rushdie
Right.
and Taslima Nasreen. It was a debate which was organized by the press club, the Bombay Press. And the next public lecture was in 1995,
Right.
December, at Birla Matushri, where about 4,000 people turned up. And after that,
Right.
from 1996, when I started giving lectures abroad, that was a turning point in my life when I first gave in Saudi Arabia. And I expected a few people to gather there, but there were more than 1,000 people in Saudi Arabia. And that's how from there, my lecture tours abroad started from 1996, and it has continued
Right.
till today.
And Dr. Naik, how do you account for those 1,000 people turning up? Was it that they were already acquainted with your speeches through CD or through another media?
What a few lectures are given. That is, Women's Rights in Islam,
Right.
Is the Quran God's Word, or Quran Modern Science. They had been circulated on, that was video, VHS.
Right.
At that time it was video.
The internet and all. Was
Video
not there
cassette.
at that time, right?
It wasn't there at that time.
Right.
It was more on the videotapes.
Videotapes, right.
And that's how some of the people had picked up and seen, and that's how the gathering
Right.
was there.
Was there.
Warnest creatures of the grave danger, the grave danger.
Have you prepared yourself as a speaker and through the ages, like from the time when you gave your first public speech and throughout, when your audiences have grown? I mean, your speeches have become more demanding because you had to go for question answer sessions. How have you ever prepared yourself as a speaker in any way?
Previously, as I told you, I never thought, even in my wildest dream, I could not have thought that I would be a speaker.
Right.
It was more of, you could say, God's planning. I could have thought of anything else in the world but being a speaker, because I used to stammer.
Right.
As I told you, that before my first speech, while handling the question and answer session,
Right.
my friend was supposed to handle, and he got cold feet.
Right.
And I substituted him, and I found that it was very successful, and the people liked, because the reasoning and the logic. That's how it started. So I was more known for handling the question answer session.
Right.
When someone asks a question on the spot,
Right.
on the spot giving a reply,
Right.
a two-way traffic is far better than a one-way traffic.
Right.
That's how I started, more handling question answer session, then giving talks. And yes, regarding preparing a speech, but natural, while giving a speech, I had to prepare.
Right.
As to see that, for example, when I prepared for my first speech, and that's what I always do, I saw various video cassettes given by other scholars, other speakers on the topic. I read books on the topic. And then I picked up all the verses of the Quran which deal with science. And I kept them on a separate piece of paper. Some were part of my lecture. Some I thought would be useful during question and answer time. Similarly, whatever I could collect, the various hadith, the sayings of the Prophet dealing with this topic of science,
Right.
I picked it up. Some I used it in my talk. Some way maybe kept for the question answer session. And whenever I prepared a lecture, I used to always assume that if someone gave this talk, what question would I ask that speaker?
Right.
So in that way, whenever I prepared any speech, I also prepared the most likely question that could be asked on that speech.
That speech.
So, for example, I have to prepare a list of maybe 100, 150 questions
And their answers.
and the answers,
Right.
memorizing well. And when people used to ask about 20 questions after the talk,
Right.
maybe 90-95% was from those questions which I prepared.
Right.
So that's how I have to prepare the talk
At the top.
and the anticipated question that could be asked. In this way, because I memorized the lectures, when I gave a next talk, this lecture could help me in the question answer session of the second talk, then third talk, then fourth talk. So as the bank of my speeches increased, 10, 15, 20, now all these were used because I had to memorize the lecture. This could be used for the question answer session of other lectures, as well as each lecture having a bank of its own questions, whether 40, 50, 100. So my data bank kept on increasing. So the speciality that people really liked,
Right.
that I could quote directly from the memory.
Right.
And whenever anyone asked a question, by the time I used to repeat the question, I used to try and find from my memory that which is the best verse to quote. And that's how then I started memorizing verses of the Vedas, of the Bhagavad Gita, of the Bible. And Sheikh Ahmed Didat, the person who was inspired by, he was a specialist in the Bible. So he said, many people have worked on Quran and the Bible, Islam and Christianity. Why don't you study Hinduism? So that's how I started doing research on Hinduism. And I started reading Hindu scriptures and the books related to Islam and Hinduism, because there was absolutely a vacuum as far as talks on Islam and Hinduism is concerned.
Right.
People thought these two religions
Right.
are like chalk and cheese. These two religions
Have
are
nothing
like,
in common.
they cannot at all have any commonalities. They cannot have similarities. It's no Zameen Asman ka farak hai.
Right.
Different between the sky and the ground.
Right.
And when I did research and I found similarities, and first time when I gave the talk, similarity with Islam and Hinduism, most of the people were shocked that how can there be a talk regarding similarity between Islam and Hinduism? And the Muslims, they said impossible. This has to be a fabricated lecture.
Right.
And people were shocked. How can there be a talk? And then when I presented, giving references. Now, whenever I give a talk, whenever I say something, I prefer it is backed up with proof. Rather than saying it's there in the Quran, I would give the reference. Rather than saying it's in Bhagavad Gita, I give the reference.
Right.
Rather than saying that regarding one God is mentioned
Right.
in the Upanishad, I give the reference.
Right.
Chandogya Upanishad,
Right.
chapter number 6, section number 2, verse number 1. Yajurved, chapter number 32, verse number 3. Reference and then quoting.
Right.
So this proved authenticity, and that's how people started liking the talks, and that's how more and more people have come for my talk, and now, alhamdulillah.
What are some of the most challenging questions which you've been asked? You are very known for your question answer sessions and the fact that whole variety of people ask questions and you answer them on spot. What are some of the most challenging questions which you faced?
Challenging questions,
Any that you can remember?
there are many. Many were challenging, especially those which are asked attacking the Quran.
Right.
There are many. There are thousands of questions asked to me.
By non-Muslims or by Muslims as well?
I prefer questions being asked by non-Muslims. The questions asked by Muslim are the same. The same mediocre common question which don't really enthrall me. How to do this, how to do wudu, how to offer salah, which are nothing. It's general. which I feel they can ask any other person. So why call a specialist? So that is the reason in my talk we say that first we give opportunity for the non-Muslims to ask questions. And after these questions are exhausted, then we give chance to the Muslims. So previously when I started, it was mixed. Both used to ask. As the popularity increased, lately, in the past few years, the amount of non-Muslims that queue up to ask questions, Muslims never get a chance. Never. So most of my talks, maybe more than 95% of my talks given in the last few years in public, it's always non-Muslims who have been asking. So regarding challenging questions, once when I was in Dubai, I mean there are many questions that are challenging.
Sure, some that come to your mind.
When I was in Dubai, and mainly some non-Muslims, they asked me out of genuineness, that they want to know the religion, some out of curiosity, some just to put the religion down. I like all types of questions. But those people that are trying to put the religion down, I like that better.
Why?
Why? That's a very good question. Because if a person who's trying to prove someone wrong, and when we give a logical reply, he gets convinced more rather than a general person. And for example, the second caliph of Islam, the second caliph after the Prophet, peace be upon him, Hazrat Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, he was one of the staunchest enemies of Islam. He always opposed the Prophet. But when he was convinced, he became the staunchest follower of the Prophet. So in that analogy, there are many people who are extra modern, extra hip. They think science is ultimate. When these people come and question and try and poke fun, or maybe try and prove their superiority, when they get a logical reply, they are better followers than a general public. So that's the reason my answers are more targeting with reason, logic and science. That's the reason the audience that come to Islam Research Foundation and my talk are youngsters, the hep crowd, those that you will not see in normal religious lectures. So that's the reason it's a different perspective altogether. So the reason Islam Research Foundation was started was to remove the misconceptions from the minds of the non-Muslim, at the same time try and convince those Muslims who are educated and who think that Islam is outdated, Quran should not be followed today, prove to them the teachings of Quran and Islam with reason, logic and science.
Could you cite any one or two questions particularly, like for example...
The other I was telling you, the Dubai one. There was an engineer, and his name was Rahul if I'm not mistaken. And when I go to Dubai, he is always asking questions. I think it was in 2005 when I went to Dubai. So he asked me a question that when I read the teachings of Islam, I was told, and he quoted, mentioned the Hadith, as well as the Quran, that the first word to be revealed of the Quran and the first verse to be revealed was Iqra, read. The Archangel Gabriel, he said, being Hindu, knowing some background, that when Archangel Gabriel told the Prophet, read, according to the Hadith, saying to the Prophet, he said, Ma ana biqari, I'm not learned. So he said, I want to know what was shown to the Prophet that he said, I cannot read. Because according to historical records and according to the sayings of the Prophet, nothing was shown. So when the Prophet said, I cannot read, what was shown to the Prophet and what was shown, where is it now? When the Archangel Gabriel told the Prophet, read, what was shown to him and that thing which was shown, where does it exist now? And if it's not, then this is a fabrication. The story is a fabrication. And believe me, as usual, I got up and I said, brother asked a very good question. That's my normal style. And I repeated the question. Believe me, I didn't have the answer. But as I kept on repeating the question, that's the way I do many a time, God's help comes. And then I replied saying that you don't know Japanese. And if I say read in Japanese, will you show me show? And then you'll say that I don't know Japanese. If I tell you that read in Japanese, you won't tell me show what is it. You say I don't know Japanese. So similarly, because the Prophet was illiterate, he did not know to read, it's not compulsory that the Archangel Gabriel had to show him something for him to say that I am not learned. So what the Archangel Gabriel said, read, Iqra. The Prophet said, Ma ana biqari, I am not learned. The Archangel Gabriel again said, Iqra. The Prophet again said, Ma ana biqari, I am not learned. The third time when the Archangel Gabriel said, then the Prophet realized that Iqra has got many meanings. Besides read, it also means recite and repeat. So then the Prophet repeated. When the Archangel Gabriel said, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Then the Prophet repeated, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. So the Prophet was unlearned, he was illiterate, he could not read and write. So nothing had to be shown to him
For him
to say that I'm not learned. But then the Prophet realized that Iqra also means to recite, to repeat, and he repeated. So giving this answer, Rahul clapped with both his hands and even the audience. So this was one of the questions amongst the hundreds that I found was challenging.
Right.
He created the universe. To him belong the heavens and the earth. The ever-living, he is the first. He's the owner of mercy. He sent his messenger